Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Business Priestess podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode. I have a special guest. His name is DeBoer, and he's from Canada. He's a cultural commentator, and I know our conversation is going to be super juicy. So, welcome, Liam.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to get a chat going here.
Of course. Do you want to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about yourself?
For sure. Yeah, no, I grew up in Canada. Going into second lockdowns, I was a musician and manager at a brewery downtown Toronto. And both of those industries kind of took a big hit. So I was looking for a career pivot. I wanted to kind of stay in the creative space. Both I was doing a lot of bartending, beer menu kind of stuff. So I got to play around a lot with that aspect of things, kind of the artistry side of bartending. And then also with music being done, I knew I kind of wanted something a little bit more hands-on that I could put my touch onto things. So I got into videography. And then I randomly made a video one day just talking about mental health during COVID, and it got amazing responses. I was pretty shocked by how it was received. It was getting messages from all around the world, and just kind of decided to continue on with that. So I've been since going into second lockdowns, which was December of 2020 for us in Canada. And since then, I've been, just doing videography, self-employed, kind of doing corporate stuff for video, for Instagram's kind of promotional content for businesses, and then as well as producing some podcasts.
Nice. Do you work directly for Instagram or for content creators?
Yeah, so I work. I have a client which is a podcast company, so I look after 6 of their different podcasts. They're like a production house for podcasts, so I look after 6 different shows, and then I just take on clients of my own as well. That kind of can span anywhere from restaurants to corporate offices, space, real estate agents, that kind of stuff.
Nice. Yeah. So I'm going to pick your brain later about some tips,
For
Instagram
sure,
tips.
definitely.
Yeah. And I would actually love to have you on as a guest speaker for my money membership program. It's like a membership business program
Oh, cool.
where I do business coaching and I invite guest speakers once a month.
Yeah,
And
no,
so
definitely.
June is actually the month for divine masculine. So yeah, we should talk about that. But
Sounds good to me.
in your journey for divine masculine embodiment, how do you think that was sparked in your life? Like, was there somebody who was like your mentor who embodied the divine masculine and you grew up seeing that? Did you have someone, or is it something that is just like more natural to you?
Yeah, I grew up in a pretty traditional household. Like, I wouldn't say religious by any means of that kind of idea, but it was very much my mom. Whenever I was born, my mom previously was a nurse. I was the youngest of 4 kids. Once I was born, she decided she wanted to retire, and then so my dad kind of carried on. He was a small business owner. He deals agricultural equipment, so tractors, snowmobiles, all that kind of stuff as well. And so I was kind of just always brought up in the sense that my dad definitely was kind of like your typical provider sense of that male role that a lot of people look to fill. So yeah, I was definitely around that environment a lot. But yeah, a lot of time spent. It's funny because I actually connect, I think, probably on a deeper level with my mom for sure. My mom and I are very close. Same with my sister and I, more than I think so. Connect like just there's no like disconnect with my dad or brothers, but just as far as things that interest and talk about that kind of thing. I'll talk a lot more about life and kind of things going on in the world, whereas the brothers and dad are a bit more sports convos, that kind of thing. And it's I can keep up, but I don't watch much sports anymore, so those conversations get lost on me. But yeah, no, I was definitely brought up in that realm. And then a lot of just my kind of idols growing up as well. Like, I mean, even people that I would listen to and really got me in shape. Even like I was definitely a bit of a partier, didn't focus on health all that much before about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And like David Goggins was huge for that. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but so he's a ultra marathon running Navy SEAL. So he's kind of just got that. I mean, he's definitely the embodiment of masculine. He's the kind of guy that runs 100 miles every week kind of thing. Like, he full Navy SEALs mentality. And so, definitely spent a lot of time listening to him just about kind of mental toughness and all of that side of thing. And so that's where I got a lot of that from, for sure, as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's so interesting to hear like people's backgrounds and hear your history, because it sheds a light on, who you are today as well. It plays a part. So it's interesting to hear like the balance in your household between, divine feminine and divine masculine, and how you grew up and you were actually like closer to your mom. And I think that has a lot to do with now too in the present day. But so just so the audience, because there may be audience members who don't know what divine masculine is or divine feminine, and how the different energetics works when we're talking about them. So with masculine, divine masculine, it doesn't actually just mean like 100% masculine, like, like raw, like brawn. And, it's not really that type of masculine when we're talking about divine masculine. We're more so, because there is like a wounded masculine also energy, and that's the energy where it's like it's very similar to like the corporate kind of structure where people work like 9 to 5s and easy burnout, and the culture is more about like produce and work until like you're 80 and then you die. And so the wounded masculine is a little different, very different from the divine masculine, whereas the divine masculine is like an energy that provides structure. So in a body, it would be the bones of the body, and then the feminine would be every other part of the body, like the lungs and the hair and the creative part of the body, whereas the bones are like create the steadfastness, the structure, the grounds, right, the grounding. And so divine masculine is more of an energy where and tell me if your dad gave off this vibe to you as you were growing up. It's someone who, if when it's embodied, makes you feel secure, makes you feel comfortable, makes you feel safe, and makes you feel like everything is okay, right? Like they'll take care of you, like they provide. And so that's the type of energy that I think is very different from like the wounded masculine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. I would say it's a bit of both as to what I was caught between. My dad definitely, it's funny, my dad is the kind of guy that would for sure give you the coat off his back to keep you warm kind of thing. But as far as talking about things on a deep level, that is maybe where there's a bit of a lost connection there. But as far as his willingness to provide and also like take care and shelter anybody around him and look after, provide safety, all of that. He was definitely excelled at that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference, I think. Not all men, but many men are men of few words, especially.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, my
Yeah.
dad was that guy. My dad was very very he's very reserved. You'll never know, like to this day I don't know if my dad believes in God. Like I don't know where he stands on a lot of, like, it's funny now, like considering what I do, where I talk about kind of culture and all of that kind of stuff and politics, all of it really online. And my dad was the kind of guy that, like, when we were 16, I remember the first time I ever voted, we walked into my family's, it was like a family get together with a bunch of aunts and uncles and that kind of stuff. And I didn't really know what was considered socially kosher at that time. And so, like, I asked my uncle who he voted for, like literally just didn't think it was a big deal. And I just remember my dad just being like, oh, that's not really like something you ask people like that, that's something you kind of, that's one, like something like religion. It's one of those topics that most people, Bill Burr I've actually remember getting this perspective from Bill Burr. He's like, and this is actually something I do in my personal life. I don't try to talk about this kind of stuff whenever I sit down at the dinner table with family or people around me. It's like, when you sit down with somebody, most of the time they're not going to budge on those things. And that's kind of where my dad was coming from, was just like, it's better just to like leave that can not opened.
Yeah.
So
And that kind of makes me want to ask you, do you believe in God or a creator?
I believe,
I'm gonna do the thing he didn't
no,
want
no,
me
no.
to do.
No, I'm an open book. I'll talk about anything. I love philosophy and I love it all. So like I'll talk about that stuff any chance I get. I believe in God, but not in this, I kind of in my own way. I definitely have a looser term of it. I don't typically think about it in the religious sense. I tend to, like, for instance, I think there could be a bunch of different scenarios. I tend to think of God as consciousness. And, we, for instance, can't really measure or understand where consciousness came from. We have zero, like, we can't think about it at all. So, or sorry, we can't conceptualize it at all. So I think, to me, that kind of exists outside of the realm of physics and reality. And to me, that's kind of God. And we're all kind of connected to that on a certain sense. With Carl Jung had a concept of the collective unconscious, where we are all connected through past, essentially, where the consciousness is feeding us ideas through our subconscious. And where do ideas really come from? And that is a way that I think about God. I also can get into like simulation theory thoughts sometimes, and I think about, like, what if God's a computer programmer? Like, technically, once we have the ability to create a simulation, this is like the more wild side of it. Like, definitely consciousness, I think about it in more like spiritual terms. If I was to think about it in more, like kind of fun terms, Elon had a great interview where he was talking about, once we have the ability to simulate a world, then technically it's always been possible. You could simulate any time period ever. And so I think, even, and these are just fun kind of thought experiments more so than like hardcore beliefs of mine. But, what if, for instance, we're all in a simulation and our lifespan is like a code that runs a time. And if, that code runs properly and doesn't pick up any viruses along the way, all of that kind of stuff, then it's allowed to operate in the real world. And that's essentially what heaven is. And then if it doesn't, then you get recoded and sent back into the program. And that's your reincarnation kind of aspect. That's just kind of fun thought stuff. But
I don't think it's I don't think it's too off from, it's like interesting hearing your perspective on it and how you view it, because it doesn't sound too far off from like a traditional view. So like I definitely, I grew up, my father was atheist. And so I didn't grow up in like a household where I was taught religion, or he actually didn't want me and my mom or my brother to go to church because he was atheist. So I wasn't like brought up in a household of religion. And however, somehow I did like connect with God, with the creator, and I have a really strong relationship with him like ever since I was a little girl. And so I think the way that I feel about God and the relationship that I have with God is so personal, and I know so much about him because of that. And of course he knows everything about me, but it's so interesting listening to you talk about God, because everything you said was not wrong. You know what I mean? And in many ways, this is a simulation. This is not like what we were created for, right? We were created for eternity. So this is just like the first run. This
Yeah.
is like the first step. And
Mhm.
it's not like the best place either. It could be a really
I hope
shitty
not. I
place.
really hope not.
I know, it's like the first realm is like the shitty one, and there's realms below us too that are worse, but like, this is like our first step in and preparing for like our actual place. So I don't think you're completely off from like even what I believe, which is much more traditional when it comes to, I guess, faith, because I'm just coming from like a perspective of like I actually have a really close relationship
Mm.
with the creator. But I also I studied world religions in college, and history was my major, and I respect like all world religions. I respect everyone's like idea of God or creator, and in many senses I think they're all the same at
Yeah,
the end of the
they are.
day. There are some different ones, but everybody I think is worthy of respect when it comes to that. So I never have an issue like talking about it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think they're all just different interpretations of the same story or the same symbology, essentially. I do typically agree. Like, I grew up very atheist, for instance. Like, I was kind of opposed to religion for a long time. I typically thought along the lines of a Christopher Hitchens or a Richard Dawkins, kind of, those intellectual um, atheists, and in or even like Sam Harris is another one as well. And I would listen to a lot of those guys talk, and they've got some very compelling arguments, and they're well spoken about it. But I do now like looking more into it and getting into the philosophy side of things rather than just, the rationale, like just pure rationale. I don't think we can answer all the questions that are out there for ourselves. And when we start to believe we can, is when I start thinking we create more issues than we solve. So, like, for instance, we do kind of think of ourselves as gods in a sense, and it's increasingly something that I think about on a, like, it's pretty much on a daily basis now, where like you'll hear people talk about nature and humans. They'll be like, okay, we need to live like, we're destroying nature, and we are in a lot of ways. But the way that I think about it is like, in separating ourselves from nature, we are thinking of ourselves as gods, where I tend to think of us as nature. We are, what's the difference between a human building a city and a beaver building a dam? There really isn't much of one, rather than just efficiency and what, is on the other end of it. But so I think by separating ourselves from nature, we've created a lot of problems. Like, for instance, even over the last 2 years, while trying to hyper focus on health, we've undoubtedly become more unhealthy, more stressed out. We've become more polarized. Like, I remember going into this thinking like, oh, like, fine, okay, common issue everyone can rally around now. And I mean, even my opinions on things have changed a bit, but like, it was very apparent very quickly that, people weren't going to use this as a time to come together and towards a common goal. And so I tend to subscribe to the Nietzsche concept now, that yeah, it was a very bad call. Like, he declared the death of God back in the mid 1800s, and said that that's when we parted ways with God and spirituality. And yeah, essentially how dangerous it is for humans to think that they can know all the answers, and without some sort of religious belief, then what do you turn to in those moments? Like, yeah, so
Yeah, it's so true. Did you so let me address that before I forget, but um that easily crumbles when someone gets cancer or
Mhm.
like there's a horrible natural disaster. That easily crumbles, that they have all the answers and that God doesn't exist.
Yeah.
They'll say that like in their 20s and 30s and like, the when they feel invincible, but a little thing can happen. They're like this littlest thing, like a natural disaster, like a typhoon or something or an earthquake. And that easily is like thrown out the window. That I'm
Yeah.
invincible and I have all the answers and I'm God himself. Like, um, I think the what you were saying before that, where sorry, I lost my train of thought, but did you see the debate with Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson about whether
Science, yeah, whether science can pick up where like religion kind of left off.
yeah, and if God exists? They had a huge debate. They had like a 4-hour debate on whether God exists.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that like blew my mind.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a very good debate. And yeah, I think we have to understand that that like the concept of God definitely exists in some sense. What that means can be different for everyone. I think where you get the where and this is where how I interpreted religion whenever I first started thinking about it was I only thought about it as a sense of control. I mean, you look at, some of the history of what some churches have done, sorry. And they've got less than stellar backgrounds, that's for sure. I mean, I was even learning the other day, you know how Lent, like with, yeah, like everybody kind of typically gives up meat on Lent. Like that's the tradition. You like fish on Good Friday, all of that kind of stuff. Well, it turns out the priest that the priest, yeah, that made that in the Vatican, that brought that about, that rule, and kind of brought that system to light, owned the largest fish markets at that time. So it's like we kind of do these things, certain aspects of it, and I think that's where I have an issue with it, is when religion becomes interpretate, like when people start interpreting it for their benefit, and
Oh yeah.
that's when I start kind of having an issue with it. But the definite like concept of it, and I think we need to get spiritual in some sort of way. And I actually, going to the Sam Harris comment about spirit, like religion and objectivity versus subjectivity, is essentially what they were arguing at a certain point there, where the objective world can't answer all of our questions, but the quantum world with science is very, very spiritual in a sense. They can even see with string theory that you can monitor an organism in, say, on one side of a continent and on another, and those two will end up reacting to one another as you're observing it on the other side. And even the observer effect too, as you start watching things and start running tests, sometimes the tests can give you different results as you start doing them, like under the same conditions, you keep running them. And now they're starting to think like almost like those atoms in molecules and everything existing in this quantum realm, like kind of get bored with the process, is what these scientists are starting to think. And it's like, yeah, it's very interesting that we're reaching a realm of science where they kind of go, whoa, there's something happening out here outside of the realms of physics that we've thought about. A good example of that even too is another discovery recently, is that black holes are emitting uh, material as well. So there's actually stuff being pushed outside of black holes. We always thought that they were just coming in, but essentially dark matter and stuff that we can't measure with our current with our current instruments are coming outside of black holes as well. So there's a whole nother realm of science that is kind of opening back up to that spirituality side, where it's kind of going, oh, we have to just kind of understand on a faith basis that these things work. than we
Oh
can
yeah.
with understand under physics.
Yeah, most people who get to like the most advanced you know, parts of science, they end up going circling back to what
Yeah.
they initially thought, because that's where it leads, because the creator is the master scientist. He created science. So you can't really compete with, you know, the person who created it. You know, God
Yeah.
created math. God is the greatest architect, the greatest artist, the greatest scientist. So it's like good luck trying to compete with and trying to
Yeah.
disprove, you know, the person who created it, all the sciences. But um yeah, what you were saying before about people, you know, believing that they're gods, and, you know, the world kind of going towards that collective consciousness. I feel like that has been the case in many, many generations, you know, in different histories and um, civilizations. And, you know, if you look at the Egyptian civilization and the Babylonians, and they all had that moment in time where they thought they were gods also. And in many senses, we are, because we are made in the image of our creator. And in that sense, we have a lot of his, you know, or hers essence, you know, so we have creative powers. Our words are very powerful because the creator created using words. So it's not like the creator created by actually just like with hands, created with words. So our words are very powerful because we have that spirit also of creation. um we, you know, I believe we do have dominion over the earth. And so we are nature, but we are set apart from nature as well. Because we were given dominion over the earth. And so in that sense, we, you know, I can understand why people believe themselves to be demigods, and because you have essences of the divine. However, I think there's a huge difference between begotten and created, right?
Mm.
So we're created, we're not begotten. It's like two different things. So if we were begotten, then we would actually be gods, and then created is a completely different thing. And so it was interesting how you brought up the simulation that Elon talked about. I feel like he has something, maybe he has it attached to his brain.
Yeah.
And that's why he's like so brilliant. But don't quote me on that. But the simulation thing is interesting because in a lot of ways this is a simulation, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it
It's a
is.
test.
And
It's a
it's
test
like
for sure.
it is
Or-
like, and you know, and there's been times when it went really wrong. It didn't go right. You know, there were times in the history where we had much longer lifespans. Like the average human had a much longer lifespan.
Mhm.
And that didn't work out well. So I think it is in a way a simulation. And so when, you know, things didn't work out, like there were adjustments made. And so it's so interesting that you use that metaphor and those analogies, because I think it's so creative, and it shows a lot about like it brings me back to like your page and how your Instagram is set. And there's so much to learn from just, I think, your Instagram.
Oh, thank you.
But
Thank
yeah,
you.
it's very creative. And I would love to learn more about that. But let me